I still get chills thinking about that night. It was one of those long road trips, the kind you think will be pretty straightforward, but then something happens that changes everything. I was driving back home after visiting some friends in a small town about 4 hours away. It was late, maybe around midnight, and I was exhausted. I had been driving for hours, and the road was dark and empty, just the occasional truck passing by every now and then. You know the feeling when you're on a stretch of highway and there's nothing around but trees and road? Yeah, that kind of drive. So I'm driving, and I noticed that my gas gauge is getting dangerously close to empty. I knew I should have filled up before leaving town, but I was in a hurry to get back home. I kept an eye out for a gas station, and after what felt like forever, I finally saw a sign for one a few miles up ahead. Thank God, I thought, because the last thing I wanted was to get stranded in the middle of nowhere. When I pulled into the gas station, it was exactly what you'd expect from a place in the middle of nowhere, at that hour. Dimly lit, old, and kind of creepy. The kind of place where you wouldn't be surprised to see something out of a horror movie happening. But I didn't have a choice. I had to stop, so I pulled up to one of the pumps. There wasn't a single soul around. The station was completely deserted, not even a clerk visible inside the store. I figured they were probably in the back or something, doing some kind of night shift inventory. I got out of my car and started pumping gas, trying to stay calm. But there was this weird vibe in the air, like something wasn't right. The kind of feeling that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. As I was standing there, I noticed this beat-up old truck parked at the far end of the lot, near the edge of the woods that surrounded the station. It looked like it had been there for a while. The windows were dark, and I couldn't see if anyone was inside. But it gave me this uneasy feeling, like someone was watching me. I kept glancing over, trying to see if there was any movement, but nothing. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. It was late, I was tired, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, just as I was about to finish pumping, I saw something that made my blood run cold. From the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move near the truck. I turned to look directly, but there was nothing there. Just the truck, sitting in the darkness. I finished pumping as quickly as I could and went inside to pay. The store was as creepy as the outside. Dim lighting, shelves that looked like they hadn't been restocked in years, and this old radio playing some kind of static-filled country music. There was no one at the counter, but I could hear movement in the back. I rang the bell, hoping someone would come out so I could just pay and get out of there. After what felt like an eternity, this old man came out from the back room. He had this weird look on his face, like he was annoyed I was there. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with this blank expression. I told him I was paying for gas, handed him some cash, and he rang me up without a word. The whole interaction was just off. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at me, like he knew something I didn't. I grabbed a bottle of water from one of the shelves, just to have an excuse to leave as soon as possible. When I went back to the counter, the old man was still staring at me. He rang up the water, still silent, and handed me my change. I muttered a quick thanks and turned to leave. As I walked back to my car, I felt like I was being watched again. I glanced over at the truck, and this time I could have sworn I saw a figure standing next to it. It was just a brief glimpse, a silhouette against the dark trees, but it was enough to make my heart race. I quickly got into my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I pulled out of the gas station and got back onto the highway, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw the old man standing outside the store, watching me leave. But it was hard to tell in the darkness, and I wasn't about to slow down to find out. I drove for a few minutes, trying to calm down, telling myself it was all in my head. But then, I noticed something in the mirror that made my heart skip a beat. The old truck from the gas station was on the road behind me, its headlights off, just barely visible in the darkness. My mind raced. Was this really happening? Was someone following me? I tried to stay calm, not wanting to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe they were heading in the same direction. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. There was something about the way they were driving. Slow, deliberate, like they didn't want me to notice them. I decided to test it. I changed lanes, then again, trying to see if they'd follow. And they did. Every move I made, they mirrored it. My heart was pounding in my chest now. I didn't know what to do. I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town, and I didn't have cell service out here. I kept driving, hoping I'd find another gas station or a diner or something where there'd be other people, somewhere safe. But the road stretched on, empty and dark, with no signs of civilization. I glanced in the mirror again, and that's when I saw the truck speeding up. They were getting closer, and I could see their headlights now, bright and glaring in the darkness. I floored the gas pedal, trying to put some distance between us. My car wasn't exactly built for speed, but it was all I had. The truck matched my speed, staying right on my tail. I was in full panic mode now. I started thinking of all the horror stories I'd heard about people being followed on the highway, about things that happened at sketchy gas stations in the middle of nowhere. I didn't want to end up as another one of those stories. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a rest area up ahead. It wasn't much, just a couple of benches and a payphone, but it was something. I took the exit, my tires screeching as I veered off the highway. The truck followed me, still gaining on me. I pulled into the rest area, skidding to a stop near the payphone. I jumped out of my car and ran to the phone, praying it worked. As I fumbled with the receiver, I saw the truck pull in behind me. The driver's door opened, and a man got out. I couldn't see his face, but he was big, and he moved with this slow, deliberate pace that made my blood run cold. He started walking towards me, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. I yanked the receiver off the hook and quickly dialed 911. It felt like forever before the operator answered. I was out of breath, trying to explain what was happening, but I kept glancing over my shoulder at the man. He was getting closer, just a few feet away now. I shouted into the phone, begging them to send someone, anyone, as fast as they could. Then something happened that I still can't explain. The man stopped, just a couple of feet away from me. He stood there for a moment, staring at me, his face still hidden in the shadows, and then he turned around, walked back to his truck, and got in. I watched in disbelief as he backed out of the rest area and drove off, disappearing into the darkness. I stayed on the line with the operator until the police showed up. They searched the area, but of course the truck was long gone. They took my statement, but there wasn't much they could do. No plates, no clear description, nothing to go on. They said they'd keep an eye out for the truck, but I knew they'd probably never find it. I finally got back on the road, escorted by a patrol car until I reached the next town. I was exhausted, shaken, but grateful to be alive. I don't know what that man wanted or what would have happened if I hadn't found that rest area, but I do know one thing. I'll never stop at a gas station in the middle of nowhere again, not if I can help it. It took me a while to feel safe on the road after that. Every time I saw an old truck behind me, my heart would race, and I'd start looking for the nearest exit. It's crazy how one experience can change the way you see things, how it can make you paranoid in situations you used to think were completely normal. So that's my story. It still haunts me, and I guess it always will. It's one of those things that sticks with you, no matter how much you try to forget. And every time I see a deserted gas station on the side of the road, I can't help but think about that night and wonder what might have happened if I hadn't been lucky enough to get away. It was one of those nights where everything seemed to be going wrong. I was driving back from a friend's house after a long day. It was supposed to be a quick visit, just a few hours to catch up, but somehow it turned into a late-night hangout. By the time I got on the road, it was way past midnight, and I still had a couple of hours to go before I reached home. You know that feeling when you're driving alone at night, and the road just stretches out in front of you endlessly? The darkness, the occasional flicker of headlights from cars passing by in the opposite direction, and the hum of your engine are the only company you have. That was me, just trying to stay awake, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. About an hour into the drive, I realized I was running low on gas. Of course, I hadn't planned for that, assuming I'd fill up in the morning, but now I had to find a gas station, and fast. The GPS on my phone was no help either. I was in the middle of nowhere, just endless stretches of highway with nothing but trees on either side. Finally, after what felt like forever, I spotted a sign indicating a gas station was up ahead. Relieved, I took the next exit and followed the signs. The station was just off the highway, tucked away behind a row of trees. As I pulled in, the first thing I noticed was how empty it was. Not just the parking lot, but the whole place. It looked like one of those old stations from the 80s, with a single pump and a small convenience store attached. I parked next to the pump and turned off the engine. There was an eerie silence in the air. the kind that makes you hyper aware of every little sound. The wind rustled through the trees, and I could hear the distant hum of the highway behind me. I got out of the car, trying to shake off the uneasiness that was creeping in. The store had those old neon signs that flickered occasionally, casting a dim light across the parking lot. I walked over to the pump and started filling up, glancing around every few seconds. There was an old beat-up pickup truck parked at the far end of the lot, but I couldn't see anyone inside. It made me a little uneasy, but I figured whoever owned it was probably inside the store. After filling up, I decided to grab a coffee or something to keep me awake for the rest of the drive. I headed toward the store, pushing open the door. A little bell jingled as I stepped inside. The place was just as run down on the inside as it was on the outside. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, and the shelves were sparsely stocked with random snacks and supplies. There was a counter at the back of the store, but no one was behind it. I called out a couple of times, but there was no answer. The weird thing was, I could hear this faint sound coming from somewhere in the store. It was like a low, rhythmic tapping, almost like someone drumming their fingers on a table. I walked down one of the aisles, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. The further I went into the store, the louder it got. I reached the end of the aisle, where there was a door marked "Employees Only." The sound was definitely coming from behind that door. Now, a sensible person would probably have just turned around and left at this point, but curiosity got the better of me. I reached for the door handle and hesitated for a second, listening. The tapping continued, steady and slow. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room behind the door was small and cluttered, filled with boxes and cleaning supplies. In the middle of the room was a small wooden table, and sitting at the table was a man. He was hunched over, his back to me, and he was tapping his fingers on the table. Tap, 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 in this unnervingly rhythmic pattern. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to say or do. The man didn't seem to notice I was there. He just kept tapping, staring at something on the table in front of him. I took a small step forward, trying to get a better look at what he was staring at. That's when he stopped tapping. The silence that followed was deafening. Slowly, he turned his head to the side, not enough for me to see his face, but enough to acknowledge my presence. I felt this sudden chill run down my spine. Something was off, really off. I managed to stammer out a weak, "Hello?" My voice sounded shaky, even to me. He didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned his head back to whatever he was looking at on the table. I took another step forward, trying to see what it was, and that's when I saw it. On the table was a small, old-fashioned radio, the kind you'd see in your grandparents' house. It was turned on, but there was no music, just static. The man's hand moved towards the radio, his fingers hovering over the dial as if he was about to change the station, but he didn't. He just sat there, his hand trembling slightly. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct in my body was telling me to get the hell out of there. I started to back away slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. I had made it back to the door when the man suddenly spoke. His voice was low, raspy, and it sounded like he hadn't used it in a long time. "Don't turn it off." I stopped in my tracks, my hand on the door handle. I didn't dare turn around to face him. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. What the hell was he talking about? The radio? I turned the handle and stepped back into the main store, closing the door behind me. My hands were shaking, and I felt this overwhelming urge to run. I made my way back to the counter, trying to act normal, like nothing was wrong. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and threw a couple of bucks on the counter. Then I practically sprinted back to my car. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. I glanced back at the store one last time as I was pulling out of the lot. The lights were still flickering, and I thought I saw a shadow move across the window. I didn't stick around to find out what it was. I sped back onto the highway, my heart racing. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that man following me or something, but the road behind me was empty. I drove for a while, trying to calm down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong back at that gas station. I didn't stop again until I reached the next town, where I pulled into a well-lit, busy gas station to gather myself. I sat in the car for a while, trying to process what had just happened. It felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? There was this weird guy in a gas station who told me not to turn off a radio? It sounded crazy, even to me. In the end, I just decided to let it go. Maybe he was just some lonely old man messing with me for kicks. Or maybe there was something more to it that I'll never understand. The drive home after that was tense. Every little sound made me jump, and I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see something or someone behind me. When I finally got home, I locked all the doors and windows, double-checked them, and sat in the dark for a while, just trying to shake off the feeling of unease. I never did find out what was up with that guy or the gas station. I tried looking it up later, but there was nothing about it online. Just a regular gas station on the outskirts of town. No weird history, no creepy stories, nothing. But every time I drive down that stretch of highway now, I feel a shiver run down my spine when I pass the exit, and I never ever stop there again. It's one of those experiences that sticks with you, you know? Makes you wonder how many other weird, unexplainable things happen out there that we never hear about. Maybe it's better that way. Maybe some things are just better left unexplained. I remember that night vividly. It was one of those long drives you don't really plan for, but end up taking anyway. I had been visiting a friend in a small town a few hours away from the city, and I decided to head back late at night. The road was mostly empty, just me, my car, and miles of dark highway. At first it was kinda nice, you know? Peaceful, quiet, but then, as the drive stretched on, it got a little eerie. Just me in the darkness, the occasional car passing by every now and then. About an hour into the drive, I noticed my gas gauge was lower than I thought. It was dropping fast, and I started to worry. Out there in the middle of nowhere, running out of gas was the last thing I needed. I started looking for a gas station, but it was just endless road and trees. I kept driving, trying to stay calm, telling myself that I would find something soon. Finally, I saw a sign for a gas station about 5 miles ahead. Relief washed over me. I slowed down a bit, trying not to use up more gas than necessary, and kept an eye out for the station. When I finally spotted it, I had to admit it wasn't the most welcoming place. It looked old, kind of run down, with a flickering neon sign that said "Open" in dull, buzzing lights. But it was open, and that was all I cared about at that moment. I pulled in and noticed there weren't any other cars around, not even parked in front of the little convenience store attached to the station. It was dead silent, too, the kind of silence that presses down on you, makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. I could hear the hum of the neon sign, the creak of the gas pump as I got out of my car. I walked over to the pump and tried to use my card, but it didn't seem to be working. The screen just stayed blank, no matter how many times I swiped. Annoyed, I looked around for a sign of life, but there was nobody. The station's lights were on, the store looked open, but it was like a ghost town. I decided to go inside to see if anyone was at the counter. As I walked up to the door, it automatically slid open with a soft hiss, and I stepped inside. The air was stale, like the place hadn't been aired out in years. It smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and something else I couldn't quite place. The store was small, with shelves lined with the usual gas station stuff. Snacks, drinks, some basic car supplies. But it was eerily clean, like someone had just been through and wiped down every surface. The counter was empty though, no cashier in sight. I cleared my throat and called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice sounded strange in the silence, too loud and echoey. No response. I started to feel that creeping sensation of unease. I mean, the lights were on, the door was working, but it was like the place was abandoned. I walked up to the counter and saw an old-fashioned bell, the kind you tap to get someone's attention. I hesitated for a second, then gave it a quick tap. The ding echoed through the store, but still, no one came out. I leaned over the counter a bit, trying to see if there was a back room or something, but it was just darkness back there. I decided to head back out to my car and try the pump again. Maybe I just wasn't swiping my card right or something. As I turned to leave, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I whipped around, but there was nothing. Just empty aisles and shelves. I shook my head, telling myself I was just being paranoid. It was late, I was tired, and this place was seriously creeping me out. I stepped outside and headed back to the pump, but as I did, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The car that was there when I pulled in, it was gone. I hadn't heard an engine, hadn't seen it drive away. It was just gone. The weird part was I was so focused on getting gas that I hadn't even noticed it leave. Now I was really on edge. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being jumpy. I walked back to the pump and gave my card another try. This time it worked, and the screen lit up, asking for my PIN. I let out a small breath of relief and quickly punched in my numbers, starting the gas. As it was pumping, I kept glancing around, half expecting someone to show up, but there was no one. Just me, my car, and that buzzing neon sign. While the tank was filling up, I heard something. A faint rustling sound, like footsteps, but softer. I turned around, looking towards the trees that lined the edge of the station. Nothing. I told myself it was probably just an animal or the wind rustling through the leaves, but every hair on the back of my neck was standing on end. The pump clicked, signaling that my tank was full. I quickly put the nozzle back and got in the car, locking the doors out of habit. I sat there for a second, hands on the steering wheel, staring out into the darkness. I just had this overwhelming feeling that I needed to leave, like right now. I started the car and pulled out of the station, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror as I did. As I drove away, I kept glancing back at the gas station, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. But there was nothing, just the empty lot and the flickering neon sign getting smaller in the distance. I tried to focus on the road, telling myself I was overreacting, that it was just a weird gas station with no staff on duty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. About a mile down the road, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. I hadn't seen any cars when I pulled out, but now there was one, following a good distance behind. It was probably nothing, just another car on the road, but it made me uneasy. I kept driving, trying to ignore it, but the car stayed behind me, never getting closer, never falling back, just keeping pace. After a few more miles, I decided to take a side road, hoping to lose them. I turned off onto a smaller, winding road, taking a few random turns here and there. When I glanced in the mirror again, the car was gone. I let out a sigh of relief, telling myself it was just a coincidence, that I was being paranoid. But then, as I made another turn, there they were again. The same car, the same headlights, just far enough behind to make me question if they were really following me, or if it was all in my head. My heart started to race, and I tried to stay calm, gripping the wheel tighter. I had no idea who was in that car or why they were following me, but I knew I didn't want to find out. I drove for what felt like hours, taking every random turn I could think of, trying to shake them off. Finally, I spotted a small diner up ahead, its neon sign glowing in the darkness. I made a quick decision and pulled into the parking lot, hoping there would be people inside. The car behind me drove past the diner, continuing down the road, and I watched it go until it was out of sight. I sat there for a minute, trying to catch my breath. I felt like I had just escaped something, though I didn't know what. I went inside the diner and sat at the counter, ordering a coffee just to have something to do. The waitress gave me a curious look, but didn't ask any questions. I sipped my coffee, trying to calm down, but I couldn't stop thinking about that gas station, about how empty it was, about that car that seemed to come out of nowhere. After a while, I got back on the road, sticking to the main highways this time. I made it home without any more incidents, but the whole drive, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. It was like I had a shadow, something lurking just out of sight, following me. Even now, I get a little nervous when I have to stop at a gas station, especially at night. I keep an eye out, make sure there are other people around, check my mirrors constantly. I know it might sound paranoid, but that night really got to me. I'll never forget the feeling of standing there in that empty station, hearing those footsteps, seeing that car just vanish and reappear. I don't know who was in that car or if they were even really following me. Maybe it was all just a coincidence, a series of events that happened to line up in a way that freaked me out. But there's a part of me that thinks there was more to it, that I was being watched, maybe even hunted in some weird way. And that's what scares me the most, the not knowing, the idea that there could be people out there, waiting, watching, ready to pounce when you least expect it.